The intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Following the evidence where it leads, with the science of self-propelled motion. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast, powered by EventHorizon.tv and hosted by Tony Rich.
Hunter-gatherer lifestyle, with its origins about 2 million years ago, is the heritage that we're all a part of, we're all a piece of. Humans evolved as hunter-gatherers, and in fact our species, Homo sapiens, is just, again, the most recent sort of twig on this bushy part of the human tree. And so what's interesting then is to think about what's happening these days in places like College Station and the rest of the US and Europe and other developed countries, is that this urbanization, modernization, mechanization of our daily life is actually incredibly recent and potentially at odds, a sort of mismatch with our hunter-gatherer past. So that raises a question. This is a question that I've been interested in the last few years, and a sort of growing field has been interested in this question. Is this modernization making us sick? This mismatch between the hunter-gatherer lifestyle in which we evolved and that shaped our bodies, and this very recent strange phenomenon of cities and cars and supermarkets. Is that mismatch making us sick? Specifically, one thing I'll focus on today, some work that I've done recently is sort of focused on this question: is it making us fat? We know that the grim statistics on levels of obesity in the US and Europe, and one of the general questions that people have come back to again and again, or ideas about why obesity is such an issue, is that perhaps we're just not burning enough calories now in our modernized lives to sort of burn off the calories that end up accumulating as fat in westernized societies. So that's a neat idea, right? And it's one I've become really fascinated by. But the fossil record is a hard place to answer that question. If we want, as human evolution researchers, to answer this question, we need different tools and different approaches. And so one of the things I've been doing the last few years is taking a different tack. What happens when we look across a big population of people and ask, are more active people burning more calories? And the answer there, again, surprisingly, is no. The body adapts to increased activity to keep energy expenditures in check. And in fact, there seems to be about a 600 calorie a day cushion that the body can use to adapt and keep energy expenditures more or less the same. All right? It's not just humans. We've done a lot of work with other primates. And for example, if we look at, this is a big study we did a few years ago, looking at primates, different species of monkeys and apes and lemurs. If you look at populations in zoos versus populations in the wild, guess what? Same calories per day. So sedentary apes hanging out in the zoo versus very active apes out in the wild, same calories a day. Okay? Lifestyle does not determine how many calories you burn every day. It's a real shock and something that's emerged out of this science. Interestingly, though, primates do show these really low energy expenditures, about 50% fewer calories a day than other animals, suggesting that evolution can push our energy expenditures around. So energy expenditure isn't something that your lifestyle dictates, but it's something that your evolutionary history dictates, which brings us right back to the beginning, right? And raises the obvious question, how has our evolutionary history shaped the way that our bodies burn energy? And so we sort of narrowed our focus and looked at humans versus the other apes. And what we find is that in our evolutionary lineage, we've increased our metabolic rates. So humans have evolved this fast metabolic rate, and we think that's a really critical piece that's allowed us to fund our really expensive brains. As you sit here quietly, about 20% of the energy you burn is going just to your brain. That's how big and hungry the human brain is. So think about that. Every fifth breath you take is just the oxygen you need to feed your brain, right? Ramping up our metabolic rate over that last 2 million years of our hunter-gatherer evolution has been a really big piece of how we've been able to afford that increase in brain size. But it's come with a cost. If you increase your energy expenditure, you put yourself at risk of starving to death. So we've also evolved some countermeasures to keep our energy expenditures in check, as well as to keep ourselves from running out of calories. And one of them is we're incredibly fat, right? Humans are the fattest ape. Humans put on more fat in the course of daily life than a chimpanzee hanging out in a zoo. And I'll just leave you then with a couple of thoughts. One is that exercise is absolutely essential for our health. We are evolved to move. That last 2 million years of hunter-gatherer evolution, that's all high physical activity lifestyle. Being out, walking, being active all day, every day. So if we can incorporate that activity, that daily activity into our lives, we're going to have great health benefits from that, and that's one thing we learned from the Hadza. That's why they don't have heart disease. That's why they don't have diabetes. It's because they're so darn active, and if we could incorporate that, we'd be better off for it. But it's not enough, okay? High activity levels aren't going to keep us thin because our bodies will adapt and keep our energy expenditures the same as they were when we were less active. It suggests that obesity is a diet issue, right? Unhealthy weight gain is essentially, it always boils down to bringing more calories in than you burn off. And if the energy that we can burn off is kind of stuck, if it's a function of our evolution and not our environment, then we're going to be able to tip those scales much easier and keep the weight off or lose the weight if we worry about the calories in. That's a much more flexible piece of the system, okay? So you still have to exercise, but you also have to watch your diet. It's not diet or exercise, it's diet and exercise.
That is a clip from a lecture by Dr. Herman Pontzer at Hunter College. You can find that on YouTube. He is my guest today. He is the author of the book Burn, new research that blows the lid off how we really burn calories, stay healthy, and lose weight. I put the link to the book in the show notes, and if you like this podcast, as the tagline of the podcast implies, following the science wherever it leads. And if that's what you like to do, you will enjoy this book. So, who is Herman Pontzer? He is a Harvard PhD, and he is an associate professor of Evolutionary Anthropology now at Duke University. We have a very interesting conversation, and we talk about his background, his research, and primarily his book Burn. So we go into detail on the cost of energy, energy balance, daily energy expenditure. We talk about what is a calorie in scientific terms. We talk about adiposity and how humans gain and lose body fatness. We talk about the 3,500 caloric deficit rule to lose 1 pound, where it comes from, when is it accurate, when is it inaccurate, and so on. We talk about the diet and activity of early hominins and the downside of living in our evolved bodies in modern times. And we talk about one of the most interesting parts of his book, his research with a modern hunter-gatherer community called the Hadza, and how that led to the understanding of constrained total daily energy expenditure. So I hope you enjoy the conversation, and without further delay, I give you Dr. Herman Pontzer. I am on with Dr. Herman Pontzer. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Happy to be here.
All right. The book is called Burn, the new science that reveals how metabolism shapes your body, health, and longevity. And I finished the book. I absolutely loved it. I'm going to put the link to the book in the show notes, and I'm going to highly encourage everyone to go out and get this book if you're a fitness enthusiast, an endurance enthusiast, or you just want to know more about the science behind how we burn energy and metabolism. This is the book to get. So I want to set the stage, Dr. Pontzer, if you can describe for our listeners first, in your own words, your background, your research, and exactly what is an evolutionary anthropologist.
Yeah, good. That's good. That's a good question. My parents are still wondering what I do for a living, so this will be good for them. They can tune in. So I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, in a tiny little town, and went to Penn State for undergrad, and had no idea, what I wanted to do with myself. And I think that was good because it was a wide open, sort of thing for me going into my first semester of classes. And I took a class on human evolution with these two great professors. It totally blew my mind. And just, it was a new way to think about the world, not just about ourselves, but about like the entire reality that we live in. Everything from how we can understand culture, what we take for granted, what we take as normal is actually this produced cultural, stuff that we all live in and marinate in, down to like how our bodies work and how we take that for granted that this is just normal, but actually humans are really strange. We're walking around on two legs, no hair, huge brains. I mean, it's we're this weird species, and how we can understand how that happened and it came to be and how it affects our lives today. And so that was just, mind blowing for me. And when I realized, I didn't know anybody who was a college professor growing up, but when I realized, wow, you can do this for a living? Are you serious? You can ask these questions and do this research, and people have careers doing this. I was hooked, man. So I kind of been thinking that way and working on that stuff ever since. And so the study of humans is anthropology. And if you want to know about how humans evolved, right, then that's evolutionary anthropology. And so that's what I do. I try to understand how our evolutionary past shapes our body. And I'm interested in how that sort of legacy of how we were shaped, how evolution has pushed us around, what that means today in terms of health and longevity, and things like diet and lifestyle and how we all get along together. I think that evolutionary legacy has a lot to tell us about how human systems work, especially our physiological systems. So that's what I study. And in particular, that's also still a very broad area. Yeah. I'm interested in how we burn energy because, energy is kind of the currency of life in biology, right? Yeah. Energy flow through your systems, from your diet into your body, throughout all your systems. And so watching energy flow and measuring energy expenditure is kind of right where the rubber hits the road in terms of biology and evolution. And so that's been my focus, including studies of human metabolism that I'm sure we'll talk about today.
And you got your PhD at Harvard.
That's right.
So you spent some time in my hometown of Boston.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I was a Patriots fan for 6 years. And I grew up a Steelers fan, so it was hard for me. But yeah, six years as a co-fan of the Steelers and the Patriots.
And you're in the book you talk about your PhD advisor was Dan Lieberman, who
that's right.
I also had on the podcast and spoke with him.
Dan's wonderful. Yeah, great advisor. Talk about you go to work in the morning, and his lab and the people that were there, my fellow students, the postdocs, him. Other faculty at Harvard. It was just such a rich environment. It felt like a playground every day, and you could just go and play with ideas and study and get data and ask whatever questions you felt like you could come up with. It was really, your success was determined by how creative you could be and how hard you wanted to work. And you can't ask for a better environment than that. Yeah,
great. Yeah, and he's a great guy. So let's dive in. So in your chapter 3, you discuss the cost of energy. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you can set the stage for our listeners and describe this, and understanding that the variables here are sometimes hard to derive because there's error bars on these variables. But to give the listener a general understanding of the variables that are made up of daily energy expenditure. I think in the book you say that humans burn 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day. Mm-hmm. And so I want to get into that, the variables that underlie that daily energy expenditure. And then after that, maybe we can talk about what is a calorie and then how humans gain and lose adiposity or body fatness.
Sure. Yeah. Great. So let's talk first about what we mean by metabolism. So metabolism is your cells at work, mm-hmm. right? Each one of your cells, you got 37 trillion cells in your body. Every one of them is a little mini factory, and it's pulling raw materials in from the foods you eat. It's chopping them up, making different molecules, building itself, whatever, and putting waste out. So that it's like any factory, right? It uses energy, right?
Right.
And so we can study, if we want to study metabolism, we want to study the work your cells are doing, we could either study the stuff your cells make, and some people do that, or we could study the energy that your cells burn to do it. It's sort of either two sides of the same coin, right? And so every cell in your body is busy all day, and all of that together is your metabolism, your 24-hour energy expenditure. And we can break down sort of which parts of the body are responsible for burning the most energy. And even if somebody is active, exercises a lot, they're still spending 60% or so of their calories every day, their energy every day, on stuff that they don't even know. It's not their exercise, it's not their activity, right. It's the background housekeeping stuff. Your liver burns tons of energy. Your kidneys burn a lot of energy. Your gut burns a lot of energy. Your immune system, right? Your brain burns 300 kilocalories a day. That's the equivalent of running a 5K every day. And wow. Whether or not you're thinking hard or not, it doesn't. Your perception of how hard you're thinking throughout the day doesn't actually affect that very much. So your brain's busy doing all this stuff that you're not even aware of course, keeping your body working. Yeah. But so that's just just to touch on that. If you ran a 5K every day as part of your exercise routine, you'd feel pretty good about yourself. Rightfully so. But your brain's doing that just in the background. Yeah. And then on top of that, that's just your background maintenance, right? About 60% of your energy. That's all your organs and organ systems. Yeah. Add on to that thermoregulation, if you have to stay cool or stay warm, right? If you're in a hot or cold environment. Fighting off an infection. Let's say you're sick. That there's energy, right? That takes work. Work takes energy. Stress seems to increase your metabolic rate, at least transiently while you're being stressed. And there's other things like that throughout the day that your body has a rhythm, right? So even that maintenance cost isn't a flat line. It rises and falls. In the same way that you can feel your body has a circadian rhythm. You're sleepy in the evenings. You're more awake in the day. That circadian rhythm that is everywhere in your body. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, finally, and I left it to last because I want people to understand this. It's just the icing on top. The icing on top is what we can control, and that's our exercise or physical activity generally. And that can be a big part of our energy budget too, depending on our lifestyle. But it's not most of it, right? Right.
Yeah. So the metabolic rate, and you hear a lot of people talk about metabolic rates. And if you do this, you can increase your metabolic rate. If you do that, you can decrease your metabolic rate. Yeah. Can you dispel this myth? Is it possible to change your metabolic rate with either something you eat or don't eat or anything?
Not really. Not beyond the extremes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's take the two extreme cases that do work. If you really starve yourself, crash diet or something, or God forbid something happens, you don't have any food, your body will respond. It's an evolved response to get through poor times. Yeah. And all species will do this. Your metabolic rate will shut down. All those maintenance costs will get turned down a little bit. So your metabolic rate comes down. That's a starvation survival response. If you start a new exercise program tomorrow and you're going gangbusters at the gym, your metabolic rate will go up for a while, right? But in both cases, let's take them separately. In the starvation case, hopefully you don't keep that up forever because that's not a healthy place to be. Right. That's sort of crash diet space. And smaller changes in your diet will not have that effect. They don't have that big of, it doesn't work. The exercise case is interesting. Your body will eventually adjust to that new exercise regime too. Right. With some of the stuff that my work has been finding. So that, you start that exercise program tomorrow. Yeah, for a few weeks, even for a few months, you might see an elevated metabolic rate. But eventually your body will adjust and kind of make room for that new exercise regime so that a year later, even 6 months later, your energy expenditure per day is going to be around the same as it was before you started. And so those are the two best chances you have to change your metabolic rate. And even those don't work very well. Yeah. The other stuff, like, I saw some magazine the other day. I was checking out of the grocery store. metabolic boosting water. I mean, what? That's just bunk. I hope everybody knows that's just bunk.
Yeah.
Hot peppers, ice water, all this stuff, none of that works.
Yeah. And that's why I think a book like this is important. And if I could, that chapter 3, if I could make that mandatory reading for every Instagram influencer, armchair engineer view of this, it would be very helpful. So we have the metabolic rate, we have your exercise activity, your non-exercise activity, right? So you're walking around and such, and so that is the component of the energy expenditure side, and we'll get into the constrained total daily energy expenditure that you talk about in the book. But so a calorie on you talk about in this chapter as well, that people have a slightly misunderstanding of what a calorie is versus a kilocalorie. Can you talk about that? What is in thermodynamics terms, what is a calorie?
So a calorie is the amount of energy it takes to take 1 milliliter of water of 1 degree Celsius. Right. So if you had a tiny little bit of water, a milliliter of water, and you could increase the temperature of that water from, let's say, 35 degrees Celsius to 36. Yeah. Then you spent a calorie to do that. It's a tiny amount of energy. It's so tiny that it's almost, in normal day-to-day terms for a human, something at our size, it's not a very useful measure. Yeah. And so we use kilocalories, and we still call them calories, which is just silliness. But we also use ounces and cups, and we do a really good job being very careful about how we use units in the States. But it's an old, arcane, historical mistake, basically. Yeah. That people decided to just say calories when they actually meant kilocalories. Which
is colloquial phrase.
Yeah, that's right. And it's stuck. For some reason, it's stuck.
In this chapter, you talk about how we increase or decrease body fatness. Yeah. And so when we increase body fat, we increase them when we consume more than we burn, and when we decrease body fat, we expend more than we consume. Am I saying that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I don't even understand why that's a controversial thing to say, but it is somehow. Yeah, it is. People say, "Oh, it's not calories," right? And that's like saying, that whatever the money is in your bank account right now doesn't come down to how much you put in versus how much you took out. Right. Of course it does, right? Yeah. And we can unpack a little bit why people are willing to believe this kind of magical thinking that it doesn't come down to calories in and calories out. I think it has to do with how hard it is to track those calories, right? People are bad, not intentionally bad, and I'm not saying, but it's just hard to do. Yeah. To keep track of how many calories you eat. Food packaging doesn't always help because sometimes it's misleading or mislabeled. And it's also hard to keep track of how many calories you burn because we've done such a bad job, I think, and this is on me and people in my world who try to teach about this stuff, teaching about how metabolism actually works and how many calories you really burn. People do a bad job understanding that. Yeah. And so, you put those two kind of uncertainties together and people go, oh, the whole thing just doesn't work the way it's not calories. But it is. It is. It's just hard to keep track of those calories sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track. And this is the math built into all of the wearable technologies from your Garmin to MyFitnessPal to all of the apps. Now, and there's error bars behind all of these. And that's some of the challenges that people have with trying to, when weight loss is a part of the goal. Yeah, it's very hard to try to estimate these and get this right. Now, this 3,500 rule, is there any correct way to apply this, or is it just the incorrect way to look at how many caloric deficit that you need to accumulate in order to lose a pound. Is that 3,500 rule wrong or right in any circumstance?
Yeah, so it's the 3,500 kilocalories per pound rule, right? That's the one we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's not, it is correct in a very limited sense. Mm-hmm. It's correct in the limited sense that the energy equivalent, the energy contained in a pound of you, right, is about 3,500 kilocalories. So if you want to burn that pound of you off, you need to burn 3,500 kilocalories without taking it back in, right? Obviously, if you, right. So now here's where you get into trouble. One thing is this: let's say that you decide to cut 500 kilocalories a day out of your diet, right? That means you should lose a pound a week. Well, first of all, if that's too big of a crash for you, right, then your body's going to respond by reducing its metabolic rate. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, you think you have a 500 kilocalorie deficit, but you don't, because your body's trying to match that new diet that you're eating. Yep. So your deficit isn't anywhere near 500 kilocalories. You think it is. It feels like it is. On paper, it is. It's not.
Yeah.
Secondly, let's say that you do take it low and slow, and you're able to lose some weight. Well, that's great. But now, because you're a smaller person, right, you've been effective in losing that weight. Now 3,500, now that deficit also isn't a deficit anymore, right? Because you're smaller. So you burn fewer calories. So now you don't even need that 500 kilocalories that you're cutting out. So you still feel like you're cutting it out of your diet. It still feels hard to do it. You still feel like you're making the sacrifice, but actually that's where your body's supposed to be now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not going to keep on losing weight. On the other side, let's say you add 500 kilocalories of exercise to your life every day. You're going to run 5 miles a day. Okay. At first that's going to work for you. But what's going to happen is, as your body adjusts that exercise level, that 500 kilocalories that you think you're adding is actually going to get trimmed down, because your body's going to take energy out of other stuff. So your total calories a day is going to change. And then we can talk about the psychology of how hard that 3,500 kilocalories feel as you go further and further down your weight loss goal, if you're not with a diet that makes you feel good. So there's the psychology of it too. But so for all those reasons, 3,500 kilocalories a pound, your mileage may vary, and probably will, and going to be a lot harder to keep on top of that.
Yeah. It's all of the components are dynamic; they change all the time, and so it's very difficult to come up with that accurately. Yeah,
and then you mentioned your fitness trackers and stuff, and the MyFitnessPal. None of that technology takes into account the way these things shift and interact and are dependent, right? And of course they are. Like imagine how poorly our bodies would function if they didn't react to our environments. But we're always reacting. We react to the temperature by sweating or by shivering. We react all the time. We're always dynamically reacting to our environments all the time. Energy is so fundamentally important to every living thing. You don't think your body has ways to adjust energy too? Of course it does. Of course it does. And so I think we need to kind of understand it a little differently. I think that's why, and actually I think this is why, somebody with my training, I'm not alone in this, but people who have evolutionary backgrounds maybe have something to add to these long-term discussions that seem to have kind of stalled. Because if you just have a nutrition background, you're going to know nutrition very well. That's great. That's important. But the why, the how is this going to respond? Like the making sense of things, I think having some evolutionary training, you don't have to be an evolutionary anthropologist, but having some evolutionary awareness of how these systems are kind of built helps you understand why things react the way they do.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because when you see people, especially on social media, smart people sometimes, dietitians, nutritionists, who just sort of propagate these myths, and I think some background training here would be basically your entire chapter 3 would be helpful subject matter to learn, just to really get the understanding of it. the dynamic part of all of this, and the scientific underpinnings of how this works. Now, the other thing you mentioned it too is on the calorie side. People notoriously underreport, right? Underreport the calories, and so when you're trying to do this and track this to try to get to your deficits, it doesn't work because people are notoriously bad at trying to report how much they're intaking into their body, and they don't track the liquid calories, all sorts of reasons that it doesn't work. They underreport. Okay, so let's talk. I want to talk about total daily energy expenditure, but before that, your chapter 4 that you have, which you title "How Humans Evolved to Be the Nicest, Fittest, and Fattest Apes." I love that chapter. So I want you to, if you could talk to our listeners about how did we get here? How do we get here with this expenditure and consumption relationship? What does the research say about the diet and activity of the early hominins? And then if you can touch on what is the downside of all of this living in our evolved hunter-gatherer bodies in modern times?
I love it. So humans we're part of the primate family tree. Right, we've been specifically our immediate relatives, evolutionarily speaking, are the apes. But no, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and people have recognized that back to the 1800s. Anatomically, we're very similar to these guys, and now genetically, we know from DNA we're extraordinarily similar to those species. But there are some obvious differences, right? I mean, first of all, you and I are having this conversation via satellite, right? The apes haven't figured that out yet. And that's because we have these big brains, right? We have these really big brains. We socially seem to be different from, apes. We kind of have these big groups that, of course, we have war and stuff like that, but we also have, big social groups that get together and but we're about to start class here at Duke. I'm going to have 100 people who don't know each other in the same room, right? For an hour and a half, and they're not going to tear each other's heads off, right? That doesn't work with apes. That would be a bloody mess if it was chimpanzees in that room. So we're social, we're smart, we have technology and all this stuff. And so the big question in evolutionary anthropology is how did that happen, right? How do you go from something that must have started off pretty ape-like when we split from chimpanzees and bonobos? It must have been pretty ape-like at first, and actually the fossils say, that's what it looked like. We walked on 2 legs, but heads were ape-like, brain sizes were ape-like, eating ape-like diets for millions of years. We've kind of petered along like that, and then something changed, and now we're us. How did that happen? And what's really fun is that like a lot of changes in evolution and other lineages, you see this all the time. Diet kind of drives the way this happens because your diet and what you're eating, that's the economics of how you grow and reproduce. And so you change the diet, you change a lot of things about a species. And around 2.5 million years ago, we see the beginnings of hunting and gathering, right? That's the change. So chimpanzees hunt a little bit. They mostly gather because they eat almost all plant foods. They occasionally hunt monkeys. Mm-hmm. So we probably were like that for a few million years. A little bit of hunting, mostly all plant foods. And they don't ever share. They never share with each other, hardly ever. I mean, it's so little that you don't even have to worry about it. Something switches, something changes, and you see a more social way of getting food. You see hunting bigger game with stone tools in these early, 2.5 million years ago in the fossil record. You can see this stuff. You can see cut marks, stone tool cut marks on big animals, like zebra-sized animals. You can't eat that by yourself, so you must be sharing it, right? And so, but there's still also, a lot of plant foods. This idea that we were only eating meat and we're like these, the carnivore paleo bros out there. There's this idea that we're only eating meat. That's not it, but it's a mix. But it's a lot of meat, but it's also a lot of plants. And it's hunting and gathering. And it's completely unbeatable as a strategy. Because you take all the advantages of a carnivore, right? Protein-rich diet, lots of energy, lots of fat, and all the advantages of a plant eater, plants don't run away from you. You can fill your belly every day, right? And you combine those. And now, because some of the group are getting plants and some of the group are going out to hunt, and it is just unbeatable. It's only unbeatable, though, if you share. Right? Yeah. So it has this social connection function. It has this energy function. It has all these things that come together. And we've been hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years. Our species, Homo sapiens, doesn't sort of emerge until about 300,000 years ago. But we're just the latest twig on a pretty bushy branch of species that are all hunting and gathering and being so successful that we take over the world.
Yeah.
And so you can still see that today. You and I, I would bet that you've never been to a big event in your life that didn't involve sharing food.
Right.
You probably share food before the pandemic. You'd share lunch with your mates at work or whatever, and that's just normal, right? That's just normal. And so that sharing, that sociality, we owe that to this sort of evolved way that we get food. And I should mention, it also increased how much energy is available, right? Because you kind of have this mixed portfolio for where you get your food, and now there's just more calories for everyone, and so we can evolve these big, expensive brains. And human babies are bigger, and we have them more often than in ape babies, and so there's more energy for reproduction.
Yeah,
we're more physically active. So it's a sea change in energy, and it makes all these human things possible.
And so the diet of early hominins. So we were sort of opportunistic. You call it opportunistic omnivores.
Yeah, that's the Homo hunting and gathering strategy, right? I mean, if we look across archaeological sites all over the globe, last couple million years, we see hominins everywhere. Hominins are our family of species, I should say that. And all the hunting and gathering groups in the genus Homo, whether it's Homo erectus or Neanderthals, right? These are groups you probably have heard of. They're all hunting and gathering. But what they hunt and gather depends on where they live. Right? If they live farther north, well, plants grow farther north, so they're getting a bit more meat. If you were a little bit less plants, you live in warmer climates where most of us are from. Then there's more plants and less meat. And the kinds of plants and the kinds of meat depend on where you live. All right, people aren't too picky. It turns out they make anything work.
Yeah, and so and chimpanzees are similarly. You said omnivores. What I find interesting is gorillas. I think you talk about gorillas in the book, that they're so big and they eat only leaves, right? Do gorillas?
Yeah, that's right. They are the biggest ones and the biggest apes, and they are the most. They're the vegans. They eat no animal foods at all. I mean, that we know of. We know
that's incredible.
I've been watching gorillas for 50 years and never seen them hunt anything. So. Yeah, I mean, even chimpanzees, I should say, 95% of their calories are plants, right? There's only about 5% or probably even less that are from hunting monkeys or from getting ants and that kind of stuff. But yeah, gorillas are 100% plants, and they're jacked.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then you talk about later in the chapter the downside, right? So here we are in modern times, the end product of all of this evolution with hunter-gatherer bodies that were designed to get us past periods of famine. And the downsides, you talk about cardio-metabolic disease and even tribalism.
Yeah, right. Well, so, we all share, and that's this human thing, but there are limits on our sharing, right? So we only share with our group. And then it becomes kind of arbitrary and cultural who's our group, right?
Right.
We can decide that we're Americans, and so that's our group, and anybody who's not American is not our group. We can make that decision. We can make the decision that anybody who's a Steelers fan is my group, and Patriots fans aren't. And I mean, of course, historically, and even now, there are racial groups, right? We decide if you're not in my race, then you're not my group, right? And I don't have to share with you. I don't have to treat you. I don't even have to give you the the same respect I would give to my group members, I don't have to give that to you. I can be mean to you, and that's okay because somebody's decided that you're not my group member. And so we make these artificial boundaries. Now that might have made some sense back when we were all hunting and gathering bands, kind of roaming around fighting for ourselves and resources were scarce. I think today, with how mixed up human populations are, people moving across different parts of the globe, people brought here, African Americans brought here against their will, and now they're in this. Ancestors. And what we owe to these groups that we have decided aren't our groups, what we owe to them, I think, has changed. When the playing field was level and things were tough, maybe you could make an argument for this kind of in-group, out-group stuff. Mm-hmm. These days, I think it's just completely indefensible. Yeah. And we need to recognize that we're all humans and we're all the same group and we all deserve the same rights as we would want to give our own group members. And I think that's really the only defensible way to go. But that tribalism is, the seeds are there. And if people want to play on that, that's what gets so scary, right? Because it's there to be exploited. Yeah. You can get people scared if you want to. Yeah. Right?
And all you need to do is look at the environment today. Everybody's got an in group, and then the fighting among in groups. You can see that. Yeah. Our half a chromosome away from a chimpanzee is one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of the fighting, the in groups. Mm-hmm. But you also talk about the cardio-metabolic disease, and I think
sure, yeah. I mean, so one of the things that seems to go along with our having more energy, we have a faster metabolic rate than other apes do, right? That helps us fuel big brains, fuel more activity. But we also have apparently evolved an ability to put more of a reserve away. So if you look at humans versus other apes, we're actually fatter. We carry a higher percentage of body fat than other apes do. A chimpanzee in a zoo, just chilling out, carries about 10% body fat. Right. That's like Olympic level athletes, right? Among humans, but they do it just as part of their normal physiology.
And you point out they're much lazier than us.
Yeah, way lazier. So there's something that's changed. That those handful of that small amount of DNA that's changed in us compared to other apes. This has some pretty big consequences, and one of them is that we put fat away more readily. And and now you take yourself out of a hunting and gathering environment where food is relatively hard to come by. You got to work for it. The food that you're eating are whole foods that are not these processed, engineered to be overeaten kind of foods. You're active every day. You take that person, you take that same body, and now you raise it in the United States where food's easy, it's ridiculously delicious, and you don't have to work for it. And surprise, surprise, people overconsume, and we have problems with obesity and overweight, and other cardiometabolic diseases too from being inactive. So, I think that legacy of hunting and gathering comes up against these strange zoos that we've built for ourselves, right? And it makes us sick.
Right. Okay. Now let's touch on your chapter 5 on the constrained total energy expenditure. So this one is the one that a lot of people are talking about. And if someone is trying to lose weight, is going out and doing a lot of exercise going to increase total daily energy expenditure. Now, this one is the one as a fitness guy, as a fitness coach. I see this and I go, oh my goodness, what? I really, you're on the edge of red pilling me on this with this one, and so I want to know all about how we come to the understanding of constrained total energy expenditure. How robust is the evidence, and is there still some more evidence needed in diet conditions needed to confirm it?
Fair enough. Well, I want to start off by saying that I'm on team exercise here. Exercise is so important for health, and we know this. And, I know this in my own life, and all your people who you work with are going to know this too. It is incredibly important and for health, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's ask what it's doing to our bodies and why it's so good for us. Okay. And one of the ideas that's been out there for a long time is, this is the received wisdom, is that one of the things exercise is so good for is it's good for boosting your metabolism. So you burn more calories than you did back when you were not exercising and you were sedentary. Well, that's a very testable hypothesis, right? And it seems like it's so obvious it's not even worth testing, but just bear with me for a moment, right? Let's test it. And so, I'll start off with the way I got into this. We were measuring total energy expenditures with a group of folks called the Hadza community in northern Tanzania. Hamnashita, man. Yeah, that's right. They are one of the most wonderful groups of folks I've ever had the pleasure of working with. And they're hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. They have held on to their old ways. If folks listening to this are familiar with like the Amish cultures here in the States, right? I mean,
right.
The world has modernized around them, but they are holding on to their old traditions because that's what they love. And they're proud of it. And they should be. It's a wonderful community.
Modern hunter-gatherers.
Yeah, modern hunter-gatherers. So they don't have any electricity. They live in grass houses in the middle of the savannah in northern Tanzania. Men hunt with bow and arrow that they make themselves. Women dig up, wild tubers, or they collect berries. They eat a lot of honey. Men chop into trees to get honey because the hives, they're often in hollows of trees. Anyhow, every day they wake up and get wild food from their environment. That's how they live. And it's an amazing culture to work with. Mm-hmm. And as somebody with my interest, I'm interested in how the human body evolved. And so these folks are modern just like you and me, but because the lifestyle holds on to these old elements, it's a way to ask the question, what does a human body look like in a hunting and gathering lifestyle?
Right.
And so we went there and did this work, collaborated with Brian Wood and Dave Reichland, and we measured total energy expenditure, total calories burned per day using the gold standard technique called doubly labeled water. It's this isotope tracking technique, very precise, very accurate. The Hadza men and women get more activity in a day than the typical American gets in a week, right? They walk anywhere between 8 to 10 miles a day.
Right.
And lots of other physical activity, hard work to live that lifestyle. So we expected them to have really high energy expenditures, lots of calories burned per day. And we did this work, and we got back to the States and did the analyses, and we're shocked to find that actually they had the same total energy expenditures as a typical American, typical European, people in industrialized societies. That was a shocker. So even though they have a very different lifestyle, they're incredibly active, they're not burning any more calories than people who are more sedentary. We've checked this with different methods. We've looked at this in other cultures. We've looked at this in other species. And again and again and again, you see the same result, which is that exercise activity, physical activity doesn't do to your 24-hour energy expenditure what you think it does, right? People who are more active do not necessarily burn more calories than people who are more sedentary. And for that matter, if I put you on an exercise program tomorrow, yeah, you'll burn more calories for a while, but your body appears to adjust so that when we check back in with you at 10 months later, at a year and a half later, your energy expenditures are not that different than when you started. We know how much different they should be, right? Because we know how much exercise costs. It's been studied to death.
Yeah, and it's not from having a smaller body.
No, that's right. It's not just because you're smaller. In fact, people often will gain muscle, which is a good reason to exercise. So they're not actually smaller. And so, your energy expenditure does not do what we think it does. Your body seems to make adjustments elsewhere to make room for that exercise. And this might be one of the reasons that exercise doesn't seem to be a great tool for long-term weight loss. People have done exercise intervention studies now for decades, trying to figure out trying to solve the obesity crisis. And there's a lot of studies out there that have said we're going to take people and we're going to make them exercise. And we're going to watch them do it so they're not cheating. And we're going to make sure they exercise. And we're going to check back in a year later after they've been exercising for a year, supervised. And, the average weight loss is about 2 kilograms, maybe pounds. Now, look, hey, that's better than nothing. And maybe you would have kept on gaining weight, so maybe we stopped you from doing that. And you will absolutely be a healthier person and live longer and have a better life. It's fantastic they did that exercise. It's really important they did. But the weight loss probably wasn't what they envisioned when they signed up for a year-long exercise program and lost 5 pounds. Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, all this stuff comes together to say that your body seems to make adjustments to exercise that have surprising results for how energy changes. Those adjustments are probably one of the reasons exercise is so good for you. We should talk about that. That's a fun piece of it. But at the end of the day, it all kind of points to exercise not being the best tool for weight loss. Good for a lot of other stuff, and good to help keep your weight off. There's a role for it. But yeah, I'll stop with that. I'm curious to hear what you think about all that.
And then we have the real life experiment of the Biggest Losers. And Kevin Hall had done some analysis of this. And obviously the Biggest Loser. And by the way, I've seen every season of that show. And the results were not good for the people. I think almost all of them gained the weight back. They had some evidence of decreased BMR. Mm-hmm. So, it's causing me to rethink. It was causing us to rethink our conventional wisdom, which is good. We should test this now. How strong is the evidence? So there was non-human studies and there's been human studies.
Yeah.
How strong is the evidence that when you increase exercise, something else decreases? Yeah. So that it sums to zero or approximately sums to zero, the gains and losses?
Yeah. I think there's different levels of evidence. I think the evidence, and by levels of evidence, I mean how much it's been studied and how many people and how consistent are the results. It's very consistent that exercise has disappointing effects on weight loss. And that's been studied in a lot of people across a lot of studies. So I think the evidence there is really strong. Now, the components of that have been less studied. Yeah. So the metabolic changes have not been studied in as many studies. And so let's take it down a notch. And I would say the evidence is very solid that part of this is this metabolic adaptation, this constrained response to exercise. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Your body's adjusting. And I think the evidence there is consistent. We see several studies showing this, several populations showing this, several species showing this. So I think this is real. Mm-hmm. Now, is this the kind of thing where I can tell you for sure your individual response is going to be X, Y, or Z in 6 months? Not yet, because there's variability in there. And so perhaps people will vary a little bit. The error bars as you talk about are there. But no, I think there's really something here. This is a well-established phenomenon at this point. And now we have to figure out the next level of detail of exactly how and why it happens.
Yeah, and we see people plateau all the time. We're trying to help people, whether they're athletes. So sometimes highly motivated athletes can absolutely will their negative energy balance and then lose weight. Mm-hmm. And they're so motivated. But there are some folks, particularly newer, they will absolutely plateau, and it's difficult to understand why they're plateauing. And sometimes it's like your conclusion is you should focus on the calorie side, making sure that you have high quality calories. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's that they're trying to what we call outrun bad nutrition. They're just trying to exercise so that they can, and then just eat pizza and beer. So I think the conclusion is you need to have a high quality intake. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how do you? So if it's hard to budge the energy expenditure piece of the equation, then you got to focus on the energy input, right? You got to focus on the quality of the diet that's coming in. And we know that if you crash diet, your body responds in bad ways. If you are on a diet that you hate, that feels miserable, you're not going to stick with it. And so, the magic is finding that diet that makes you feel full, makes you feel satisfied, but you're eating fewer calories. And people have different ways to get there. And what is frustrating for me is somebody who studies this stuff in the metabolism side. You say, guys, you got to find a way to eat fewer calories that you don't feel miserable. And people say, yep, and you have to go keto. You go, no, maybe that works, but you don't have to do that. Yep, you have to go vegan. Well, okay, that might help for you, but there's different ways to do it, and people argue about the best way to do it, or it's the only way. I think that kind of stuff isn't real helpful. Anyway, that's where I come to.
And so, but you're a strong, still, like you said, a strong advocate for the benefits of exercise. God. What would you say are the main benefits of exercise?
Well, we know we can just watch what happens to people who exercise. They age better, more mental sharpness, hearts are healthier, they avoid cardiovascular disease, they avoid diabetes. It is incredibly important to stay healthy and stay sharp. Full stop. And we know that very well. Some of those mechanisms are really well understood. Keeping your muscle mass up, keeping yourself strong as you age is really important.
Right.
Keeping that blood flow through your brain, and there's actually signaling molecules that are released when you exercise that actually help keep your neurons, your brain cells young. Super important. The parts of it that I've been studying and focused on we're still working out the details, but it also seems that exercise reduces inflammation. Right, part of the adjustment that your body makes to that exercise is to spend less energy on inflammation, perhaps, less energy on stress, to keep your reproductive hormone levels in a healthier place. And so, I think that those are the exciting benefits that we need to unpack as well, because we know that exercise has these other benefits. So, you absolutely have to exercise. But so, back to your point about, people exercise and then they use that as an excuse to eat an unhealthy diet. I think that comes down to the messaging, right? Yeah. When we talk about diet and exercise as though, they're just partners in this, and if you don't want, it's all just diet and exercise. We kind of say it that way, and it's all about the calorie view of things or whatever. Then the implication of that is that you can trade one for the other.
Yeah.
You don't want to exercise, great, watch your diet. You don't want to diet, okay, just exercise more. And that's not how I think it actually works. I think, diet and exercise are two different tools with two different strengths. And you kind of have to do both.
You got to do both,
just trade one for the other.
And I think that's the ultimate message: is exercise has a significant amount of benefits. You can't just use it to try to lose weight by itself. You got to focus on continuing to exercise, but also have high quality diet without getting into all of the fads about keto to Atkins to everyone's got a fad diet, and as you say in your book, they're all intricate ways of getting to negative energy balance. If you follow it, it could work, but being highly skeptical at any fad diet like that's extreme. That it should be taken with a grain of salt, and high quality foods are probably just the strategy that might work for most people. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, lean meats, nuts, seeds.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you can stay away from the ultra processed stuff, stuff that comes in a package and has an ingredient list as long as your arm.
Yeah,
stay away from that. Shop at the vegetable aisle, shop at the butcher's counter, the stuff that your grandparents would recognize. That's still good advice.
Yeah. All right. We covered a lot, and we're running out of time. So how can people, obviously I'll put the link to the book in the show notes. And how can people find you out on social media?
Oh, I'm on Twitter at Herman Pontzer. That's probably where I'm most active. I have an Instagram account that I don't use very much, unfortunately. Not enough hours in the day, and social media is, it'll soak up your entire day if you let it. You can find us here online at Duke. We've got the lab website and see what's going on here with our research. check us out. If you're excited about the Hadza Hunter-Gatherers, you're intrigued by that, I encourage you to go over to the HadzAFund.org. It's a charity that we've set up to help give back to that community. So that's HADZAFUND.
I'll put the link in the show notes as well for that.
Please do, yeah. And it's a great way to kind of find out more. And if you have the opportunity to support them, that'd be great. But yeah, keep paying attention, because this is an area of research I think it's going to continue to grow and surprise, and it's really fun to do. I can tell you that. Yeah. So hopefully we'll have more to say as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, Dr. Herman Pontzer, for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks so much.
Much thanks again to Dr. Herman Pontzer. His book is Burn. Check it out in the show notes. And check out the link to the Hadza Fund in the show notes, as well as links to his social media presence. What are some key takeaways from this podcast? Well, first and foremost, it's important that we continue to evaluate the best science available and question our preconceived notions and accept the science regardless of whether or not the science agrees with our preconceived notions or cherished views. If our bodies normalize to a sort of expenditure constraint or a sort of expenditure speed limit over time, it's important that we continue to understand this and the elements of how and why it happens. So I will continue to look at the research and evidence here. As Dr. Pontzer confirmed, consistent exercise is immensely important for a host of cardio-metabolic and health reasons. And a calorie is a calorie, and we increase or decrease body fatness by consuming more than we expend or expending more than we consume, respectively. Full stop. And that's as understood as just about any of the scientific facts we know. And of course, because of our evolved hunter-gatherer bodies that have been designed by natural selection to get us through difficult periods of famine and other life issues, then our bodies have a way of exerting its will on us in order to try to influence that energy balance equation and perhaps try to defend a certain body composition set point. If weight loss is a goal, you must understand that first, our bodies are not machines, and it's very difficult for the average person to predict with a good model or a great model the underlying components of expenditure and consumption in order to will a certain caloric deficit result consistently. As we discussed, imagine trying to predict the money in your checking account and all of your expenses and income sources either change dynamically or have some form of error bar around it so you don't know exactly what it's going to be. So realize that at best it's very difficult. And finally, because of reasons described by Dr. Pontzer and others, if weight loss is a goal, you can't just simply outrun bad nutrition with exercise. That's not going to work. You need to have a sound and science and evidence-based strategy for the consumption side of the energy balance equation. That's a much more flexible tool that you have in your toolkit. And for people that are finding themselves plateauing and you don't know why, it's probably a good strategy to look deeper into what you're consuming and taking more steps there versus just simply trying to attack the problem by doing more sit-ups and other activity. But always remember to take science and evidence-based simple approaches to your strategy. Avoid the social media, Instagram, influencer, I know more about this than anybody in the room type of folks that want to tell you that some fad diet is a silver bullet approach. There are no silver bullet approaches or solutions. There are only trade-offs. And whatever you decide on, maybe you do have some idiosyncratic reasons why you think some specific diet, sometimes people have medical issues where some specific diet is right for them, fine. But realize that consistency is something that you will need to have in order for you to eventually see results. So I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to write in at contact@eventhorizon.tv. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast.
Follow Event Horizon Endurance Sport on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for training and nutrition programs and on-demand learning. To become a member of our Endurance Institute or for complete archive of podcasts, log on to our website, eventhorizon.tv.